All right, hi everyone. My name is Leah Viscardi and I'm from Chrome Photo Co. And today I'm going to be showing you how to edit some of my product photos that I've taken for clients and how I go through and pick the good ones and edit them. So here's some techniques that you can use. So I took some photos. I always take a small amount of photos and then go back, and if I need to edit something, I will go back. So at the bottom, you'll see all the different photos I have. So I can go through all of the photos and kind of cull through them. So what that means is just pick the good ones. Anything that's too blurry or too bright that I can't edit are not good ones to pick. Like, for example, this one is way too blurry, so not helpful. This one's pretty bright, so not very helpful. Again, another bright one. So as I go through this, I'm going to edit. So let's pick, for example, this one here. So you have the back blurred out, but the front is detailed. So if we look at our sidebar here, you have your different tools: exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. I always tell people, if you're new to editing in Lightroom, always stick to this box right here that talks about the tone. If you're a little more advanced, you can work on the presence. Also, there is a mobile app for this, so you can easily do this on your phone as well. I prefer desktop just because it's easier to see and easier to move things around. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if you see in the background here, and here I have my extra background. So the first thing I'm going to do is make this square by going to here and getting one by one. So as you can see, this is now square. So I'm going to move this down so that the center box is right at the heart. Going to click crop. As you can see, you still have that background right there, but it's not as pronounced. You still have the blur here and you still have the blur here. If you don't like the blur, that's my camera. I used a 3mm lens, 35mm lens, so it created that blur. It's not necessary. I just like it because it shows the detail of the heart. So first thing you're going to do is play with exposure. You're going to go all the way up, all the way down to kind of see you're kind of in the middle range. So you want to brighten it just enough to brighten the background here and the background here. Next thing I'm going to play around is shadows. So as you increase the shadow play, what you're actually doing is you are adding more light. As you add more shadows this way, you're adding more shadows that way. So that negative actually is not a negative. So I want to add a little bit of shadows to blur out the black even more and amplify the color of the heart. This is where you can also play with your black. So if you darken it that way, it also darkens this. So shadows play around with the background, but blacks play around with all of the products of the photo. So I don't want to play with it too much. And then if you add highlights, you can make that brighter, or you can bring that down. So for me, I'm going to keep that like that. Then I'm going to play around with the dehaze, the clarity, and the texture. So clarity actually does clear up the photo a lot. So if you want to see, this is 0 clarity, this is increased clarity. So it actually brings out that darker part, which is great. Dehazing really darkens the background. So unless you really want a darker background, you don't want to bring too much into that. Also, if you notice, this plane is not straight. So if I want to straighten the plane, I can use the angle tool to straighten it like that, and I can straighten. Now, what that does is also add an extra layer to the background, but we really are focusing on that inside there. You can also play with vibrance. So vibrance brings out the color, but it also adds more yellow-ish in this. And saturation also does the same thing. So I don't like to play with that when you want realistic colors with products. So I think that's a pretty good one. So I'm going to export this. and move on to my next one. So as you can see, if you look at the bottom, you'll actually get to see the advanced portion as well. So I'm going to also show you with props how this looks. So as you can tell, I used the same bracelet here, but I added a lot of background noise, as people call it. So there's a lot going on. So you have the peace signs, the purple, and then you have the wooden background, and then you even have sprinkles in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is make this a square. I make all of mine squares unless otherwise stated by the client, but the squares are great for Instagram. So as you notice, you actually are taking out a lot of that background. So again, you're going to want to move this to the middle and emphasize that the bracelet should be the center of attention. So you're going to crop that. And what happens is it creates a great framing angle. So you have this part of the piece framing this part. You have this still pushing at the bracelet. And then you have a great straight line here. So that helps with the framing process. The biggest thing is taking this from above, you're actually creating a lot of light onto the bracelet. So it's not actually showing a proper color. So what I want to do is I want to bring down the whites. And as you can see, the whites actually bring up the color. So you can also bring down the highlights. And as you can see this, what happens is it really fades the wood. So this is where I will actually add some blacks to it. So as you can see now, that color of the bracelet is too greenish. So now I can bring my whites back up and my highlights back up. So that actually helps. And the background is still there. This is where you can also play with your dehaze tool a little bit. And then you can also bring down the exposure if you want to, so you don't have a bright and airy. So when you have a background that's really darker, you can play around with the dark and moody feeling. So I'm actually going to make multiples of this. So this is good for a dark and moody feel. But now I'm going to make more of a bright and airy. And how you can do this is I'm going to bring back the haze, bring up the black. I'm going to bring back down the highlights, back down the whites, and I'm going to bring the shadows back up and bring the exposure back up. So then I'm going to also export this. I'm going to use unique names. So then if I go to my actual images, so you have light and airy, dark and moody, light and airy, dark and moody, light and airy, dark and moody. All right, I'm going to bring that down. So we're going to go to the next one and play around with that as well. So there is the next shot. Here is a detailed shot where it's blurring out this front piece here and really focusing on the angle of the bracelets. Not the exact one that my client wants, so we're not actually going to filter that as one of our choices. This one is another framed shot. When you actually make this 1-to-1, it brings in the clarity of the actual bracelet like that. But half of this bracelet is blurred, so not going to be very helpful for us. All right, the next one we're going to work on is the straight on shot, just like this. So you have the blurred at the top, blurred at the bottom, focused on the heart sideways. So again, we're going to do a 1-to-1 ratio like this. It really slides into that. So you might actually want to extend this so you have some background. And we're going to take out that black because that does not look well. So there we go. It's still guided. This actually doesn't need a lot of editing because your focus is on that. If you want to brighten it up, you can, but it actually creates those extra lines that you don't want. So we might not want to brighten it up too much. With exposure, we actually want to maybe use shadows a little bit because it makes the lines a little less rigid. Then we'll just straighten it up a little bit, bring down the blacks to emphasize the back and really emphasize the bracelets. Then we're going to create some more whites, play around with the blacks a little bit, and it looks good. Now we're going to center this again, so this is not straight. That's definitely not straight, so we got to play around with this. That should look better. Nope. Angle. There we go. That looks much better. So that looks good. Centered, shows details. There is a little speck here. We zoom in right there that we can play around with. So you take this healing tool, and all you have to do is you can make this different size. Just cover it. Cover it. And then when I go like that, it disappears. And the same thing with this little heart here. It has the emphasis of that green. It's kind of in all of this part, but I really don't want. And there's this little speck here that's blurred out. So change that as well, so it's not as bad. Oh, so what happened there was it wasn't healing it the way it should have. So I'm going to use the Band-Aid instead of the eraser. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to use the Band-Aid. I'm going to make this a little bigger because Band-Aids have to utilize more space. That looks much better. Okay, and that's done, and we're going to export it. So, like I said, today's little task here of editing some of my clients' galleries is really playing around with exposure, shadows, highlights, the whites, the blacks, and playing around somewhat with clarity and dehazing. Now, dehazing and clarity are very advanced. If you've never really practiced with Lightroom, you really want to practice before you keep continuing on. But these are great ways to edit photos. I do this all the time for my clients. And if you have photos that you've taken with your iPhone, you can also import them here and edit them. So that's also something you can do before posting. If you ever need help, just let me know. And you can also find editing tips and tricks on my Instagram at Chrome Photo Co. or on Facebook, Chrome Photo Co. Photography Business. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe.